The sun was sinking low over the wide Wyoming plains, bleeding orange across the horizon as Elias Ward urged his horse along the lonely trail home. It had been a long day trading supplies in town, replacing worn tech, picking up a few essentials, and he was looking forward to the quiet of his ranch, the only place where the world didn't weigh so heavy on his shoulders. Elias was a man who kept to himself, and that suited him just fine. Out here, silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful, predictable, safe, but peace has a way of shattering when you least expect it. As he rounded a bend where the trail narrowed between two rocky outcrops, something on the side of the road caught his eye, a flash of blue fabric fluttering in the wind. He slowed his horse, squinting through the dust. At first, he thought it was discarded cloth, but then the fabric moved, and with it, a small figure stepped forward, a young girl, barely 8 or 9, thin as a fence post and standing stiffly beside a broken wagon wheel dug halfway into the dirt. Her dress was torn, the hem ragged as though she'd been walking for miles. Dust streaked her face, and her hair, once braided neatly, was falling loose around her shoulders. But her eyes, the way they lifted and fixed on him, held something too old for a child to carry. Behind her stood a woman, leaning against the wrecked wagon. Her posture was slumped, one arm wrapped tightly around a bundled baby held close to her chest. Even from a distance, Elias could see she was swaying on her feet. Exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. Elias pulled back on the reins and dismounted slowly, not wanting to startle them. His boots hit the ground with a soft thud. The girl took a breath so deep it made her small shoulders rise. Then she stepped forward, chin lifted with a courage that made his heart tighten unexpectedly. "Please," her voice cracked, but she kept speaking. "Please, Miss, take us with you." Elias froze where he stood. He'd heard many things in his life, but never that, not from a child with her whole world crumbling behind her. Her plea wasn't born of whim or foolishness. It was survival. Desperation threaded every syllable, wrapped in a bravery she shouldn't have had to learn so young. He lowered himself to one knee so he wasn't towering over her. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Before she could answer, the woman behind her stirred. She lifted her head, pushing away from the wagon with effort. Her face was pale, drawn tight with exhaustion and hunger. But what struck Elias most was the protective way she held the baby, as if her arms were the last barrier between her children and the world. I'm sorry," the woman whispered hoarsely. "Lena shouldn't have bothered you. We don't want trouble. We just need a little time to rest." Elias looked from the woman to the fever-flushed baby, then back to the girl Lena, whose hope flickered like a candle in the wind. He felt something settle painfully in his chest. This wasn't just a family in need of a moment's help. This was a family in danger. "What happened?" he asked quietly. The woman swallowed hard. "Our horse died 2 days ago." Her voice shook. "We've been walking since." Lena clutched her mother's skirts. "Mama tried to carry us both. But the baby, he's getting hot." Elias didn't speak for several long seconds. The silence around them grew thick, heavy with things unspoken. Then his eyes lifted to the woman again, her trembling legs, her hollow cheeks, the way she clung to the baby even as her strength failed, and something inside him shifted. This moment, he knew, would change everything. For a long moment, Elias said nothing. The wind brushed through the sagebrush, carrying the faint rattle of dry stems. The vast land around them felt too empty, too silent for what he was seeing: a woman barely standing, a baby burning with fever, and a girl trying to hold the world together with nothing but a brave little chin. The woman shifted her weight, wincing as though pain shot through her legs. Elias stepped closer, slow and careful. She watched him with wary eyes, soft brown, dulled with exhaustion yet sharpened by instinct. She hugged the baby tighter, almost defensively, as if afraid he might try to take the child from her. "My name is Mara," she said, voice hoarse and low. "This is Lena, and this," she pulled the blanket back slightly, revealing the tiniest face, flushed red with heat. "This is my son, Jonah." The baby whimpered a weak, strained sound that made the girl flinch in worry. Elias's jaw tightened. "How long has he been like this?" "Since yesterday morning." Mara's hand trembled as she brushed a damp strand of hair off the baby's forehead. "I tried to keep him cool, but the sun, and the walking, I've done what I can." Her voice cracked on the last word. Lena pressed herself closer to her mother, her small hand gripping Mara's dress with white-knuckled desperation. "Mama doesn't sleep," she whispered to Elias. "She just keeps walking and walking." Guilt flickered across Mara's face. Elias looked at the broken wagon, its wheel half splintered. It hadn't moved in days. The ground was trampled around its circles of pacing, maybe nights spent shivering in the open. He imagined Mara alone in the dark, trying to soothe a feverish baby while keeping her daughter from freezing. "You should have gone back to town," Elias said softly. "We couldn't." Mara swallowed, eyes darting away. It wasn't safe to go back. Something in the way she said it, tight, raw, edged with fear, made Elias's stomach knot. He crouched again, examining the girl's worn shoes, the cracked leather straps nearly falling apart. Lena's small feet poked through the front. "When did you last eat?" he asked her. Lena bit her lip. Mara answered instead. 2 days ago. I tried to ration what we had, but it wasn't enough." Her voice broke with shame. I wasn't enough. Elias felt a flicker of anger, not at her, but at whatever had driven them to this trail, to this starving place where a mother blamed herself for surviving. You did everything you could, he said firmly. Mara let out a shaky breath, as if no one had told her that in a very long time. Her knees buckled suddenly. Elias moved fast, steadying her by the elbow. She flinched not from him, but from sheer physical collapse. I'm fine, she insisted weakly. No, Elias said, voice low but steady, you're not. She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw past the exhaustion, saw the terror hidden beneath. A woman holding on by a fraying thread. We don't want charity, she whispered. If you could just help us get to the next ranch, we'll find work. I can cook, clean anything. I can't carry them anymore. Elias stared at her, at the girl trying not to cry, at the baby whose breaths came too fast. He felt that same stirring inside him, a pull he didn't want, didn't ask for, but couldn't ignore. This wasn't charity. This was a family fighting to live, and he knew deep in the marrow of his bones that he couldn't walk away. Elias stood in silence for several long moments, the gravity of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. He had never been a man quick to act on impulse, but neither had he ever been one to ignore suffering, especially the kind standing right in front of him. Mara tried to straighten herself, though her legs trembled visibly. If you could, point us toward the nearest ranch, she said, forcing the words out. I'll be able to walk once I rest a minute. Elias didn't miss the lie wrapped in her sentence. She wouldn't make it another mile, and the baby burning with fever against her chest certainly wouldn't. I don't need directions. Lena piped up suddenly before Mara could hush her. I just need you to take us. Please, Mr. Her voice was so soft, so desperate, that it sliced right through him. Mara closed her eyes in shame. Lena, she whispered. Don't beg, I told you, but what if he says no? Lena cried, turning to her mother. What if nobody else comes? A sentence spoken by a child who had clearly learned too young that the world did not bend for people like her tightened something painfully in Elias's chest. He exhaled slowly and rose to his full height, brushing dust off his coat. I didn't say no, he said gently. Mara blinked in surprise. I don't want to trouble you. It ain't trouble, he interrupted, voice rough, not from irritation, but from the swell of emotion he wasn't used to showing. You can rest at my place tonight, that's all. Mara nodded, relief and hesitation warring in her eyes. Just for tonight, she whispered, we'll leave at dawn. Lena's face fell. Elias noticed something inside him hardened. This woman was willing to drag herself across half a state just to keep her children safe. She wasn't looking for rescue, she was looking for permission to survive. But dawn would kill her if the night didn't. Elias stepped closer and reached his arms out, not toward Mara, but toward the baby. Let me hold him, he said quietly. You look about ready to fall over. Mara stiffened, her arms tightening protectively. I won't hurt him, Elias said, softer this time. I just want to help. Maybe it was the sincerity in his voice, the quiet steadiness of him, or the way her own strength finally gave out, but Mara slowly eased the baby forward. Elias gathered the tiny boy carefully, surprised by how light he was. He pressed the back of his fingers to Jonah's cheek. The heat radiating from the little body shook him. This fever needs tending right away, he murmured. Mara nodded, fear flooding her eyes. Elias turned to Lena next. You ride with me, all right? It's a long walk otherwise. Her eyes widened not with fear, but with something close to hope. She nodded rapidly. He lifted her onto his horse and settled her securely in front of the saddle. You hold on tight, he instructed. Okay, she whispered, gripping the horn. Finally, he turned to Mara. Come on, I'll help you up. She hesitated, pride flickering for one last moment, but exhaustion crushed it quickly. She took his hand. Her fingers were icy, trembling. He guided her onto the horse behind him, her weight barely felt. She was so weak. Once they were all situated, Jonah against his chest, Lena held safely. Mara, leaning against him out of sheer necessity, Elias gathered the reins. You're coming with me, he said firmly. End of discussion. Mara didn't argue. Couldn't. As the horse started moving, she let her forehead rest briefly against Elias's back. Just for balance, but he felt the subtle exhale. The surrender of a woman who had been holding herself upright by force of will alone. And as the fading sunlight cast long shadows across the trail, Elias knew this was no temporary kindness. This was the moment everything in his quiet, guarded life began to change. The horse started forward with a slow, careful step, as if it sensed the fragile weight it carried. Elias kept one hand on the reins and the other around the feverish baby pressed against his chest. Jonah's breaths came shallow and hot, each one sounding like the tiny struggle of someone too small to fight but too stubborn to quit. Lena sat in front of Elias, her small hands gripping the saddle horn so tightly her knuckles whitened. She didn't speak, she didn't wiggle, she didn't even look around at the vast plains rolling out on either side. She stared straight ahead with the tense stillness of a child who had learned long ago not to make trouble. Behind Elias, Mara, clung to the saddle, her arms trembling around his waist only because she had no strength left to hold herself upright. Each bump in the trail made her sway, and Elias adjusted his balance each time so she wouldn't fall. For a man who lived his life in silence, suddenly carrying 3 lives at once felt almost unreal, too immediate, too heavy, too important. The trail to his ranch was long and open, the kind of stretch where the wind cut across the land unchallenged. Dust lifted around them, the sun kept dropping lower, taking what little warmth remained. Elias felt Mara shiver against him. "You cold?" he asked over his shoulder. She hesitated, as if she didn't want to admit any weakness. "I'll be fine," which meant she was freezing. Without another word, Elias unbuttoned the side of his coat and pulled one flap backward so it wrapped slightly around her. Mara didn't protest this time. Her forehead brushed his back again, not out of trust. Not quite, but because her body simply couldn't hold itself rigid anymore. Lena looked back at him, confused. "Mama never gets to wear a coat," she whispered, almost as if she feared being overheard by the wind. Elias felt something twist inside him. This wasn't just hardship. This was a life stripped of every comfort. He adjusted Jonah carefully in his arm. The baby whimpered, a tiny sound full of heat and discomfort. Elias pressed his palm gently against the boy's back, feeling the shallow, quick breaths. "He's burning up," he muttered. Mara flinched. "I know. I tried. I kept water on him, but we ran out." Her voice cracked, and she stopped, as though ashamed to say more. "You did what any mother would have done," Elias said quietly. She didn't answer, but he felt her trembling ease, just a fraction, as if being told she hadn't failed was more than she'd expected to hear. When the ranch finally came into view, dusk had already taken hold, turning the sky a deepening violet. The outline of Elias's home, wooden, weathered, but solid, stood like a promise against the darkening horizon. Lena gasped softly. "Is that your house?" A kind of fragile wonder threaded her voice. "It is," Elias said. "And you're safe now." As they approached the porch, the front door flew open, and Mrs. Calloway, stout and sharp-eyed as ever, stepped out with her hands on her hips. Lord above, Elias Ward, what on earth? She froze when she saw the baby, the girl, and Mara leaning weakly behind him. Her scolding tone vanished instantly. "Get them inside. Now." Elias dismounted with Jonah in his arms and lifted Lena down. Mara tried to swing herself off the horse, but her legs didn't catch her, and Elias caught her before she hit the ground. "I'm sorry," she whispered, mortified. "You don't have anything to be sorry for," he said firmly. Mrs. Calloway ushered them in like a storm in a bonnet. Warmth hit them immediately, the smell of soup, the glow of the hearth, a comfort they hadn't felt in days. Without needing a single explanation, Mrs. Calloway took Jonah from Elias and rushed him toward the firelight. Elias helped Mara inside, her weight featherlight against his steady grip. For the first time since he'd found them, the tension in the air shifted, not gone, not healed, but softened by the promise of shelter. And as Elias shut the door behind them, he felt the unmistakable weight of a decision already made in his heart. These 3 were not leaving at dawn. Not if he had anything to say about it. Night on the ranch had a way of settling, heavy and quiet, over the land, wrapping everything in a slow, thoughtful hush. The cattle had long gone still, the lanterns outside the barn flickered low, and the wind carried only a faint whisper through the grass. It was in this kind of silence, one that pressed against the heart, that secrets tended to slip free. Clara stood on the small porch outside the house, arms curled around herself for warmth. She wasn't cold. The night wasn't especially biting. It was her nerves, tight, trembling, buzzing beneath her skin. She didn't hear footsteps, but suddenly, John was beside her, leaning one shoulder against the post, like he'd been waiting for this moment for days. He didn't look at her right away. He gave her space, breathing slow, steady. "Girls asleep?" he asked quietly. She nodded. Finally, Lily wouldn't close her eyes until she was sure the door was locked. Twice. John's jaw tightened with something like anger, but not at her. "She's too young to know that kind of fear," he muttered. Clara swallowed. Fear lived in that house. They'd fled. It had lived in her, too, for far too long. "I know." Another long breath, then another. The silence stretched between them, heavy but safe. John finally turned his face toward her, the lantern glow catching in his eyes, warm, steady, waiting. "Clara, you don't owe me anything. But someday, I hope you'll tell me what really happened, why you ran, what you're afraid of." Her chest tightened. A dozen answers rose, bumping against the wall she'd built. Every day she'd watched him work with his hands, gentle with her children, patient with her skittishness, calm in the face of her panic. And it had only made her walls shake harder, because a man like him, kind, steady, unselfish, felt too good to believe in. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of me." His voice dropped, low and wounded, though he tried to hide it. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "Not of you. Never of you." He relaxed just slightly, but his eyes stayed fixed on her with the quiet attention she wasn't used to. "I'm scared of going back," she continued. "Scared he'll find us. Scared he'll take Lily again. Scared he'll hurt the baby. Scared," her voice cracked. "Scared that anywhere I stop, anywhere I try to breathe, He'll be right behind me. John didn't move to touch her, not yet. Instead, he spoke in that low, deliberate tone that made her nerves loosen. Little by little. He's not getting near you, he said, or those girls. Not on my land, not while I'm breathing. Her lips trembled. You say it like you mean it. I do. Clara blinked, fast as heat stung her eyes. I'm tired, she whispered. Tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of pretending I'm strong enough to keep them safe. You did keep them safe, John said gently. You walked miles alone. You held them while you were starving. You put your body between them and a man twice your size. Clara, you did everything a mother could do. More. A sob slipped out, quiet, broken, years overdue. And that was when John stepped closer, slow and clear, giving her time to pull back. She didn't. She let his hand rest just above her elbow, warm, steadying. Safe. You don't have to be strong alone anymore, he murmured. Clara leaned in, not quite touching him, but close enough that she could feel his warmth steadying her breath. Close enough that the truth she'd buried for years finally rose. I'm falling apart, she whispered. He shook his head. No, you're finally letting someone hold the pieces. Her tears slipped free, but for the first time, they didn't feel like fear. They felt like relief. And in the soft darkness of that porch, Clara, for the first time in years, let herself believe she wasn't alone. Morning came to still. John had been up before dawn, a habit carved into him by years of cattle work. But today, a tension hung in the air, tight enough to sting the skin. The horses were restless. The dogs paced near the fence. Even the wind felt wrong, too sharp, too hurried. Clara noticed it the moment she stepped onto the porch with the baby in her arms. Something's off, she whispered. John didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on a trail of dust rising far out on the road, thin at first, then thicker, pushed by wheels moving too fast. A wagon. Moving hard. Moving toward them. Clara's breath stopped. It's him. John didn't say. Are you sure? He trusted her instinct more than anything. He glanced back toward the door. Lily inside. She's drawing with the chalk you gave her. Good, he said. Keep her away from the windows. Clara darted inside, her heartbeat thundering. Lily looked up with a grin, chalk dust on her fingers. Mama, look, I drew our house. Clara forced a smile. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Her voice cracked. She kissed the top of Lily's head. Stay right here. Don't move unless I tell you. The girl nodded, used to following instructions without question, a habit that hurt Clara's heart. Outside, gravel crunched. A wagon lurched to a stop near the gate. The man who climbed down was thick-shouldered, greasy, his face twisted with purpose and fury. Clara's knees weakened, even from inside the house. That was him, the man she'd run from, the man who had bought her once and thought he owned her forever. He scanned the ranch, already shouting, "Woman, I know you're here. You think you can run with what's mine?" John stepped forward before Clara's breath even returned. He didn't shout. He didn't flare up. He simply stood between the house and the man, feet planted in the dirt like roots. They're not yours, John said. The stranger spat at the ground. You don't know what she owes me. I don't care. She's my wife. You forced her. That's not a marriage. The man grinned with something rotten. Doesn't matter. She left me, and I'm here for what's mine. John's voice stayed even. You're not taking her. Or those girls. She ain't yours either. The man sneered. John reached slowly to the back of his belt, not for his gun, but to unclip the safety strap. She is under my protection, he said. That's enough. Silence stretched. The stranger laughed once, sharp and ugly. You think you scare me? You're just one man. Maybe, but I'm the man standing here. Inside the house, Clara pressed a trembling hand against the window frame. She wasn't hiding. Not anymore. She was watching the man who had threatened her life and the man who was willing to risk his own for her. The stranger lunged toward the porch. John moved faster. He stepped in front of him, blocking the way. Turn around. Leave the county. Don't ever come back. The man reached for his gun and that was the last mistake he made. John drew first. Clean, controlled. His voice didn't even waver. Don't. The stranger froze, not because he feared John, but because he realized something too late. John wasn't bluffing. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't trying to scare him. He was protecting a family, his family. The man cursed, spit, glared, but he backed away, slowly, climbing into his wagon with a look that promised he wouldn't forget this humiliation. But as he rode away, John didn't lower the gun until the dust trailed off into nothing. Clara stepped outside, holding the baby close, her breath shaking. You didn't let him near us. John holstered the weapon, turning to her with a look that made something deep inside her unravel. I told you, he said softly. You're safe here. She stepped closer, closer, until the baby rested between them and her forehead touched his chest. John, what are we now? She whispered. His hand rose slow, asking permission, and rested against her back. Whatever you want us to be, he said, but I'd like to be the man who keeps you. All of you. Her breath hitched. Lily came running from the doorway, chalk still on her hands. Mama, are we staying? Clara looked at John, at the man who had stood between her past and her future. She nodded. Yes, sweetheart, we're staying. And John quiet, lone, steady John let himself smile for the first time in a long, long while. The first night in Elias's house passed in a haze of exhaustion, fever tending, and quiet determination. Mrs. Calloway worked with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had raised 6 children of her own. She boiled water, cooled cloths, mixed herbs, and settled Jonah in a basket near the fire. Elias stayed close, kneeling by the baby with a wary protectiveness he didn't entirely understand. By morning, Jonah's fever had eased enough for his breathing to even out, not healed, but no longer burning from the inside. Mara woke on a small cot in the corner, blinking against the unfamiliar comfort of a roof and warm blankets. For a moment she looked confused, her mind still stuck on the trail, expecting the cold ground and endless walking. Then she saw her son sleeping peacefully and lowered her head into her hands, trembling with relief. Easy now, Mrs. Calloway murmured, laying a gentle palm on her shoulder. You're safe, all of you. Mara nodded, though her throat was too tight to speak. Lena, meanwhile, had discovered the wonders of a real kitchen warm bread, sweet butter, and a cup of milk she drank with both hands. She sat at the table like a child, trying not to get too comfortable, her back straight, eyes darting, as if afraid she'd be asked to leave at any moment. Elias entered then, freshly washed and dressed for ranch work, and paused when he saw Lena's attempt to hide her smile. You eat as much as you need, he said gently. There's plenty here. Lena nodded once, then took a second bite of bread, so big it nearly made her cheeks puff. He hid a smile behind his beard. Mara attempted to stand, but swayed immediately. Elias crossed the room in 2 strides and steadied her. You need to rest, he said. I've rested too long already, Mara whispered, embarrassed by her weakness. I need to work. I can cook, clean, help with anything, please. Let me show my gratitude. Elias shook his head. You don't owe me anything. Her eyes flickered downward, unsure how to respond to kindness without expectation. Mrs. Calloway stepped in, hands on her hips. You'll do no work until I'm satisfied. You can stand without swaying like a sapling in a windstorm. Now sit. Mara sat, and for the first time since Elias had met her, she let someone else take control without protest. The days that followed over the next several days, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Mara recovered slowly, regaining color in her cheeks. She remained quiet, often watching Jonah sleep as if afraid he might fade if she looked away too long. Sometimes Elias caught her wiping tears. She thought no one saw tears of exhaustion, relief, and wounds deeper than the trail had carved. Lena, by contrast, blossomed quickly. She helped Mrs. Calloway with small chores, fed the barn kittens, and followed Elias around with awe-filled curiosity. You got so many cows, she said one morning as she trailed behind him, her small steps trying to match his long ones. Not that many, he replied. It's more than I've ever seen. Elias glanced down at her. How many did you see before? None, she said proudly. He stopped walking then, struck by how matter-of-factly she said it, how easily she revealed the limits of her world. Lena, he said softly, you're safe here. You know that, right? She looked up at him. For how long? The question hit him harder than he expected. As long as you need, he said. She nodded, as if making a silent promise to herself not to believe it too quickly. Mara's distance and Elias's quiet concern. Mara avoided Elias at first, not out of distrust, but out of fear of burdening him. Any time he approached, she rose to fast or apologized too quickly. She moved like someone expecting the world to snap at her heels. But Elias noticed everything: the way she wrapped her arms around herself, the way her shoulders tensed at unexpected sounds, the way she kept thanking him as if waiting for the moment he'd tell her she'd overstayed her welcome. He never said it, and every time he reassured her, something in her posture softened. Just a little. Mrs. Calloway noticed too. You're watching her more than your cattle, she told Elias one evening. He didn't deny it, he didn't know how to. All he knew was that the quiet house felt different with them. They're not louder, not disruptive, but warmer. And for the first time in years, Elias Ward found himself stepping inside after a long day of ranch work and feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt like someone was waiting for him. The ranch had grown quieter over the following days, but not with the heavy kind of silence Elias had lived with for years. This was a softer, quiet, gentle footsteps. The sound of Lena giggling as she fed the barn kittens, the delicate coos and sighs of Jonah sleeping peacefully at last. Things that warmed the stillness rather than hollowing it out. Mara, however, remained the one part of the house wrapped in shadows. She worked carefully, always careful, never doing too much, never asking for anything, never sitting unless told. Mrs. Calloway eventually let her help with light chores, small tasks that allowed her hands to stay busy. But the woman's spirit remained alert and guarded, as if she expected life to punish her for even the smallest comfort. Elias watched her from a distance, not intrusively, not hungrily, just aware. He noticed how she flinched at loud voices, how she held herself stiff whenever boots thudded too close, how she apologized for things that weren't her fault. The more he saw, the more one truth settled uncomfortably in his chest. Someone had hurt her long before he found her on that trail. One evening, after the sun had dipped behind the hills and the kitchen carried the warm smell of stew, Elias found Mara outside near the corral fence. She stood alone, arms wrapped around herself, watching the sky turn a deep fade of violet. Jonah slept bundled in her arms, his breath soft and even. "He's looking stronger," Elias said gently as he approached. Mara startled slightly as she couldn't help it, then nodded. "He is, thanks to you. And Mrs. Calloway." She paused. "And Lena's never eaten so well in her life." Elias leaned his forearms on the fence beside her, giving her space. "You don't have to thank me every time." "Yes, I do." She said it too quickly, too forcefully, as if gratitude was a shield she had learned to wield for survival. Elias didn't push. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. For a long moment, she was silent. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but heavy with unsaid memories. Finally, she spoke. "My husband died 3 winters ago," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the distance. "He worked in the mines. There was a collapse. They brought him home on a door." Her voice shook, but she kept going. "I had Lena, and Jonah was barely growing inside me. I didn't know how to make it on my own." Elias listened without interrupting. "My family didn't want us," she continued, "said they couldn't afford another mouth, let alone 3. So I remarried." Her hands tightened on Jonah's blanket. "I thought I was doing what was best for my children." Elias didn't have to ask how that turned out. The bruised tone of her voice answered for her. "He changed," she whispered. "Or maybe he was always that way, and I was too desperate to see it. He drank, he gambled. Everything I earned went to his debts. If I didn't cook fast enough, he shouted. If Lena cried, he slammed doors. If the baby fussed, he blamed me." She swallowed hard. "When we couldn't pay what he owed, he packed us into that wagon, said we were going to his cousin's ranch. But on the trail, he stopped, told us we were slowing him down." Her breath hitched. "Then he took the horse and left." Elias felt a surge of anger so fierce it made his jaw clench. Mara hugged Jonah closer, her voice barely more than a breath. "I kept walking. I didn't know where I was going, I just kept going." Elias turned toward her fully, his expression soft but steady. "You kept your children alive," he said. "That's what you did." A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it quickly, embarrassed. "I don't want your pity. You don't have it." His tone was firm. "You have my respect." Mara blinked at him, startled because pity was familiar, but respect, that was something she hadn't been offered in a long time. For the first time since Elias had met her, her shoulders eased it much, but enough to show a woman beginning to believe she wasn't a burden. Enough for him to realize he would do anything to keep that small flicker of peace alive inside her.